guys. I am guest reading chapter 11 of the Landry News. So your questions for this chapter are, number 1, what was the problem that Dr. Barnes had with the editorial section and why? Question 2, do you think Dr. Barnes was right to feel this way about Mr. Larson? Why or why not? All right, so we are reading chapter 11. Tremors point to major quake. All right. A copy of the second edition found its way to the office because the principal's secretary, Mrs. Comier, had found one on the floor in the hallway. She thought Dr. Barnes would enjoy reading the article about the best teachers. Dr. Barnes sat down at his desk and read every word of the newspaper carefully, nodding and smiling now and then. This was good, clean fun, excellent writing, and a fine learning experience. The bit about the top 10 least favorite foods was cleverly done, and the story about the favorite teachers was written in a very positive way. The writers didn't take any cheap shots. There was no foul language. There was no criticism of the school, the administration, or the school policies. There was nothing even a little bit controversial about the second edition of the Landry News. But when Dr. Barnes read the editorial, his eyes narrowed and his heartbreak quickened. A scowl formed on his broad, fleshy face, and his nostrils flared and quivered. He reached for the red pen, took off the cap, and started over. He read through the entire paper again, looking for a problem, any problem. But he was done. He only circled one item on the whole page. It was editorial. He had drawn a heavy red circle around one name, Mr. Larson. Dr. Barnes had strong opinions about Mr. Larson. For 7 years, Dr. Barnes had been the principal of Denton Elementary School. Mr. Larson had been a constant problem. Dr. Barnes didn't hate Mr. Larson. That would be too strong of a word, too emotional. This had nothing to do with feelings, he told himself. It was a matter of professionalism. Dr. Barnes disapproved of Mr. Larson because Mr. Larson did not behave professionally. For Dr. Barnes, education was a serious business, and Mr. Larson took his educational responsibilities too lightly. Here's a photo of Dr. Philip Burns, the principal. All right. Dr. Burns opened his desk drawer and took out the key to the filing cabinet where he kept the records about each teacher at Denton Elementary School. Swiveling around in his chair, he unlocked and opened a wide file drawer. It wasn't hard to find Mr. Larson's file. It was 3 times fatter than any other file in the drawer. Every year, Dr. Barnes got letters about Mr. Larson from worried parents. Parents asked if it was normal to have no homework in social studies, no homework in reading, and no homework in English, no homework at all the whole year. Parents wrote and asked if their children can be transferred to the red team. The real reason was always the same, getting out of Mr. Larson's class. At the end of every school year, each teacher was required to have a meeting with the principal. It was called a performance review. Dr. Barnes flipped through the stack of performance review sheets he had filled out for Mr. Larson, one for each of the last 7 years. Poor, unacceptable, poor, unacceptable, unacceptable, and unacceptable. At the bottom of each review form, there was room for a brief statement from the teacher. Over the past 7 years, every statement from Mr. Larson had been pretty much the same. Turning to last year's review sheet, Dr. Barnes gritted his teeth and read what Mr. Larson had written. It is clear that Phil and I have very different philosophies of education. I sadly acknowledge that he objects to some of my methods and practices. Sincerely, Carl A. Larson, teacher. Many parents thought that Mr. Larson should not be a teacher. Several school board members thought that Mr. Larson should be fired, and several other board members thought that it would be nice if Mr. Larson retired early. But, as every principal and every school board knows, getting rid of a teacher is not an easy thing to do. There has to be something serious, something provable, something that violates school policy, or something that violates the law. Dr. Barnes closed up Mr. Larson's fat file folder, put it back in the drawer, shut the cabinet, locked it, and dropped the key back into its place. He set his copy of the Landry News in the center of his desk. Then he laced his fingers behind his head and leaned back in his chair. He smiled. He had a good feeling about this little newspaper. This situation had possibilities. This could turn out to be a whole lot better than people had been hoping for. Sitting up suddenly, Dr. Barnes reached for his phone. He punched Mrs. Cormier's extension. He could hear her bustling around behind, out in the main office area, no doubt getting ready to leave. He could have swiveled his chair around to talk to her, but he enjoyed using the phone. It seemed more official. The phone on Mrs. Cormier's desk rang 1, 2, 3, 4 times. She finally answered, "Yes, Mr. Barnes." There was an edge to Mrs. Cormier's voice. It was 4:15 on a Friday, and she was in no mood for secretary games. Standing at her desk with her coat and her hat on, Mrs. Cormier could see that Dr. Barnes sitting there, 15 feet away, drumming on his desk with his fingers. Really, how hard could it have been for him to just swing around, smile, and talk? Yes, Miss Cormier? Yes. Please put a note into Mr. Larson's box for me. I want to meet with him Monday, right after school. Right after school. It's a matter of some importance. Miss Cormier hung up the phone and called through the open door. Mom, I'm reading. Sorry, your teacher just barged in. Miss Cormier hung up the phone and called through the open door. Monday is Columbus Day, Mr. Barnes, but I'll leave him a note about the meeting on Tuesday, and then I'll be going. Have a good long weekend now. Mrs. Cormier scrawled through a hasty note onto a sheet on Dr. Barnes' stationery, stuffed it into Mr. Larson's mail slot, and was out the door in 30 seconds. All right, so we'll go over the questions one more time. So question 1, what was the problem Dr. Barnes had with the editorial section, and why? And number 2, do you think that Mr. Barnes was right to feel this way about Mr. Larson? Why or why not? All right, bye.